Welcome to Web3 Watchdogs, the podcast that takes a deep dive into the world of Web3 security, compliance, and risk. Join Michael Pearl as he interviews executives from across the Web3 industry to uncover the challenges and opportunities of this rapidly evolving space. Web3 Watchdogs is sponsored by Seizures, your one-stop shop for Web3 security and threat mitigation. Seizures harnesses the power of AI to eliminate hacks, scams, fraud, and compliance challenges in real time, and even before they happen. For more information, visit Seizures.ai. That's CYVERS.ai.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Web3 Watchdogs podcast, the podcast that focuses on everything security, safety, compliance, risk, fraud prevention, basically anything that has to do with security and safety in the Web3 space. And today we have a very interesting guest, Joanna Summers. Joanna is the Chief Recovery Officer at Asset Reality. Joanna has a very extensive background. We'll talk about it in a second. But I couldn't help but noticing, Chief Recovery Officer is quite unusual, right? Usually when you see CRO, you usually mean Chief Revenue Officer. So you have a very unique title, I guess.
Yes, I do. And thank you, Michael. I'm really excited to be here today. I've been looking forward to it.
Thank you. So maybe we can talk a little bit about your background. And I mean, you were a U.S. Marshal, right? Basically doing recovery and forfeiture. Maybe you can expand on that and tell us a little bit about your background in the government.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started with the U.S. Marshal Service Asset Forfeiture Division in mid-2013. And by the end of my time there, I ran the Complex Assets Unit, and I was in the Complex Assets Unit the entire time. So our unit was responsible for any ongoing business or complex financial instrument that was subject to federal forfeiture. So everything from franchised restaurants to high-profile assets like those in the Madoff case to Le Hermitage Beverly Hills in the 1MDB case. And it was really interesting and challenging work. But then everything really changed in late 2013 when we had our first case involving Bitcoin, which was the Silk Road case. So that was really a game changer because crypto was this new volatile asset class. But we did see the potential to really transform asset forfeiture with it. The scale of the seizures, like millions of dollars in Bitcoin from a single case. It was really unlike anything else we'd seen prior to that. So as I researched asset recovery to go in for my interview back in 2013, I knew what it was, but the more I learned about it, the more I was really excited to get into the role. And I just realized how important and rewarding that asset recovery work can be. Knowing that the efforts that you're putting into what you're working on will go back to reimbursing a victim of a crime, or they can be used for social reuse programs like building schools, roads, hospitals. I found that really motivating and just really nice to feel like we could give back.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And we're going to dive into, some of the things that you've mentioned, obviously the Silk Road and the 1MDB and so on. But maybe before that, can you tell us a little bit about the company you're working for right now? What is it that you do? What's your role there?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Asset Reality, it's our mission to modernize asset forfeiture. So especially for crypto, we're looking to provide tools and expertise to government and agencies worldwide. We saw a gap, and I noticed this at the Marshal Service too. We just saw countries struggling with the same crypto challenges over and over again that I faced at the Marshal Service, like how do we seize this? How do we value digital assets? How do we report on digital assets in conjunction with all of our seized physical asset inventory? So at Asset Reality, we have a SaaS platform that streamlines every step from seizure to liquidation with real-time auditing to track your holdings. And then we also have professional services, I'd call it. So, training, standard operating procedure development, helping build stronger forfeiture programs for countries, or helping countries that don't have them, building them up from nothing. So in terms of my role at the company, I wear a few hats because we're a young company. My main focus is ensuring that law enforcement is getting the most from our platform, making sure that we're using their feedback to improve it. But I also spend a lot of time driving our public-private partnerships because collaboration is key. So speaking at fraud conferences, speaking at cyber summits, for example, and just really meeting with everyone.
That's very interesting. And are you active only in the US or outside of the US as well?
No, we're worldwide. We're a UK company with a US entity. So we operate worldwide, which is great. We have people in the EU, the US, the UK. One of the nice things about being at the Department of Justice and starting this crypto program was that I got calls from colleagues worldwide having the same issues, and that global need, it really just kind of united the entire crypto asset forfeiture world. So I think it's all very global now.
Cool. And I'm dying to dive into the Silk Road issue, but 1 second before that, I mean, you said that you were involved in the Bernie Madoff case and 1MDB and so on. In that, exact moment when you started looking into crypto crime, and now you have already more than a decade of doing that, what similarities and differences you see between, regular financial crime and fiat and crypto crime?
Yeah, so I mean the differences in the crime itself, or just more about like how we manage it. In terms of how we manage it, I think when you're seizing crypto, it's different than seizing traditional assets like cars or real estate. Physical assets just have so many ongoing considerations. If you have a seized car, you have to have a secure storage lot for it. It needs oil changes. You have to account for the contractor's work. And then if you're talking about something like L'Ermitage Beverly Hills, that's a really high profile hotel. So even though you have a management company in there handling day-to-day operations, from the US Marshals perspective, you still have to provide oversight of the contractor, make sure payroll is getting done, do a monthly review of the financials. So it can quickly become a full-time job to do all of that work. Whereas crypto, it's really low maintenance if you just seize it and custody it correctly. Move the crypto to a law enforcement controlled wallet, and then it just sits on the blockchain. No upkeep really needed. Your only concern is making sure that you've secured the wallet against any type of unauthorized access or hacks. So I think the difference I see in the two is that seizing and transferring crypto is really unforgiving. You need to transfer it to a wallet to control the private keys, but one mistake, sending it to the wrong address, and it's gone. And one of the things I see a lot of is agencies worldwide struggling to catch up with how unforgiving it can be. I've done a lot of trainings abroad where officers thought they seized a ledger device and that was enough. And they put it in an evidence bag and they sat on it for 2 years, and then they went to go liquidate it and they were like, where's the crypto? So just, making sure people have that basic knowledge of understanding how to move funds to a new address and ensure custody. I think the training piece has been really critical when it comes to upskilling officers on blockchain basics and cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the irony of, seized crypto that can be stolen again by hacking into a federal wallet, right? So I'm not even sure if that has ever happened, but I'm quite certain that the Lazarus Group and, the other hacking conglomerates won't have any, second thoughts on doing that.
Yes, and if you look at social media, you see they try to tag law enforcement wallets. They're not always correct, which is great, but there's definitely a lot of eyes on all of that work being done.
Yeah, I can imagine that it's the holy grail of the hackers to some extent.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, so you've mentioned seizing crypto assets, right? So how does it work? So let's say, just to give you an understanding, right? One of the things that we do at Seizures is that we identify hacks every day, sometimes even twice or 3 times a day. And then we contact the exchange or the individual, usually it's a company. And when they realize that the money is gone, then we try to help them, to try to trace the funds. But oftentimes, and unfortunately, you cannot really recover the funds anymore, because I think that the genius of those hacking conglomerates is the fact of how they move the funds and how they make it go away in seconds, right? I mean, it's very easy, or relatively easy, when the funds land at a regulated centralized exchange, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when they swap to Monero tokens and go to unhosted wallets, at the end of the day, the chances of actually catching those funds are close to zero. How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's been a heartbreaking conversation that we've had to have with many victims of pig butchering schemes and different frauds. I've certainly experienced that a lot in the private sector, speaking to victims who've said, like, can you help trace these funds and recover them for us? And just being honest and upfront with people that the chances of recovery are actually very low. It is very difficult to recover the funds. And we'll get into pig butchering more, but just seeing a lot of the times people being re-victimized by firms that say they can help and then they require an upfront payment. They're not working with law enforcement. You can see the re-victimization happening a lot. So I think it is really important to note that the chances of recovery are low because crypto does move so quickly. When it comes to the Marshal Service, I think what's really interesting about the United States and different about us is that we have this U.S. Marshal Service Asset Forfeiture Division function where it's not a seizing agency. And the asset forfeiture program allows the Marshal Service to just focus on custody, management, and disposal because of that. So the FBI, the DEA, the investigative agencies, they get to do all of that work and keep the focus on that and not have to worry about all these other steps in the process. And one of the problems I see worldwide is that in other countries that don't have a Marshal Service function, you have investigators also trying to figure out custody, also trying to figure out liquidation, also, responsible for an audit on an asset. And they've got too many roles to even be able to just focus on really doing that investigation work.
Yeah. And how do the marshals do the actual investigation? What kind of tools are they using? I can imagine that it's a mixture of on-chain and off-chain, right?
Yeah, so what's interesting about the Marshal Service is all of the work that came to me at the Marshal Service came after the seizure was completed by the investigative agency. One of the things that we did do was step in for pre-seizure planning. Like we would ideally come in around the same time they were doing the investigation to help guide U.S. attorneys' offices and seizing agents determine whether or not they should seize something at all. So is there any liquidity? Is there any value in this asset? Are you going to take something that's really just going to cost the government money to maintain, and helping with those decisions? But by the time it came to me, it was my job to issue a blank wallet address, make sure it was secure, and have a whole program around that. So luckily for me, I was not responsible for the entire building of the case and the investigation part of it. I got to come in a little bit after that.
I see. And you obviously we talked about the Silk Road, so perhaps you can give us some background because with all the scandals that are happening, only today, if I'm not mistaken, 150 million were stolen, and we're still in the shadow of Bybit and so on. So there's so many scandals that it's very easy to forget. But the Silk Road was a unique, maybe one of the first, scandals in the crypto space. So maybe you can give us some background on that, and please explain your involvement in the seizure of the funds and handling basically of the funds and maybe even reimbursing them.
Sure. So back in 2013, crypto was really barely understood. And we knew what it was, but we hadn't had any cases that involved it. And there was no playbook at the Marshal Service. There was no playbook in the federal government on what to do because the Silk Road case was one of the first major Bitcoin seizures. So for me, it was really exciting to be able to build out an entire process from nothing. It was really a unique experience to be able to add an entire asset class to the asset forfeiture program and develop a workflow for it. So some of it, was common sense. Like we'll take some of the workflows we already have from seized cash, for example. You're not going to generate a wallet address or do anything without a witness. So you should always have two people working on it. But other parts of the process, like securing private keys, that was totally new. So that was really a unique experience. And I think one of the overarching issues that we all faced when we first had the case was, okay, do we build a whole program around cryptocurrency? I mean, taking custody of 175,000 Bitcoin, that was a lot. And then knowing that we were going to have to do this auction process over about 18 months so that we didn't flood the market, that was a lot of time and effort. And at the time, Bitcoin was anywhere from 250 to 600 a Bitcoin. So imagine selling, 175,000 of them now. So that was really interesting. And I think both the Marshal Service and the investigative agencies were wondering where crypto would fit into a program. Does it get, lumped in with cyber? Is it its own thing? How much time and energy should be spent on it? Like, is crypto just going to be a fad? There's all these other assets you're working on and all this other work you have to do that you just really had to balance how many resources you should be devoting to it. But it didn't take long after Silk Road to start seeing more cases involving Bitcoin than Ethereum and beyond. So it quickly became clear that the asset class was there to stay. and that we had this capability to bring in unprecedented amounts of proceeds to the asset forfeiture program with the liquidation of it. So I think it shaped my perspective a bit going forward, in that I knew it was going to be important for every asset management unit globally to build a secure, scalable crypto forfeiture program. I think we kind of knew right away, okay, if we're going to see this more and more frequently, it's going to be in every case. Like the same way cell phones and laptops were in one or two cases here and there, and then they were in every case going forward, we started to realize that crypto would be in a lot more cases going forward.
Yeah, you've mentioned a very interesting fact that is oftentimes overlooked in the media. The fact that the US government, and I'm guessing other governments as well, but the US government is probably an outlier here in terms of the size, holds a lot of crypto, right? Especially BTC and ETH. And these things can influence the market when they are being liquidated. So, and even now, when there are these discussions after, President Trump has stepped into office with respect to the reserve, right? So many people are saying that this will be the kind of the ground for the reserve will be those funds that were seized. So maybe you can give us a spotlight on that, on, how the US government is holding these funds and how it's handling it, if you can elaborate.
Yeah, there's probably about $20 billion there that's up for grabs between Department of Treasury and the Department of Justice. And right now it's looking like they are focused on the executive order on the Department of Treasury, probably because IRS criminal investigations has the bulk of that inventory. So it's a clear path for them to take custody of it. So what they're talking about is moving cases that do not have victims that are already forfeited over to this new fund. And that's because the asset forfeiture program is used to reimburse victims of crime. So we're not talking about victim cases right now. We're talking just about cases that don't have any victims, and they can just move the funds right over once you get a final order of forfeiture and the case is completely adjudicated. So I think we'll see a lot more over the course of 2025 about what that looks like. There's yet to be a clear workflow set up about where the fund is, where is it going, is everything that's currently sitting forfeited in inventory, how is it physically being moved from cold storage devices or from exchanges to whatever it's going to. So it's going to be interesting to watch that unfold.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned earlier pig butchering, right? And that's one of the biggest problems that people are not even aware of. It's actually bigger than the amount of funds that are stolen through hacks. And what we see, and obviously it's no secret right now, after the Economist, if I'm not mistaken, has done a series about it, and then the Netflix movie, basically pig butchering is orchestrated by multinational gangs, usually in Southeast Asia. How do you think that the US government or any other, let's say, Western government can go about it? Because at the end of the day, their citizens are being victimized and the funds are flowing towards, again, usually Southeast Asian countries where, by the way, in some cases, it's places like Myanmar where, even diplomatic relations and things of that sort will not do. How do you think that you can actually tackle these crime networks, both from the standpoint of taking them down, but even before that, how can you actually issue any enforcement with respect to seizing funds from those networks?
Yeah, the losses are absolutely heartbreaking when you look at the pig butchering cases. I know the IC3 report, the Internet Crime Complaint Center from FBI, they've noted the huge surge in these types of crimes. And Americans reporting losses over 9.3 billion, which is a 66% increase over the previous year. And we know too that most victims don't report, either because they're embarrassed or they're scared. So I think the crime is actually much bigger than people are giving it credit for. I think this has risen to a national security issue, and I think it should be treated as such. The pig butchering scams work because they're exploiting people's trust and loneliness, and they're doing that to the tune of billions of dollars. And to your point, they are run by organized crime. They're run by Southeast Asian gangs that are laundering funds through Chinese money laundering networks. And in Southeast Asia, to make it even worse, the scammers are trafficked to facilitate the scam. So they too are victims. So I think there's a few different things that need to be done. For one, I think the government must treat fraud as seriously as they treat terrorism, and they need to start pressuring these countries that are hosting scam hubs with sanctions. I think we need to get ahead of it and stop the payments before they happen to the extent that we can. Get financial institutions, for example, to reach out to potential victims and warn them. And that's not an easy thing to do. But I will say I did see the FBI and Secret Service do a really, really good job with this over the last year and a half. They started Operation Level Up, where they proactively warned people that they were about to be victims of a scam. And it was really a credible effort on their part because they've done a lot of this work in person. And even as of last month, they'd warned over 5,800 victims of cryptocurrency investment fraud. 77% of those victims were totally unaware they were being scammed. And a handful of them needed to be referred to victim specialists for suicide intervention. So it's really a horrible crime. We work with Operation Shamrock, which is run by Erin West. She's doing amazing work in this space to bring awareness to it and combat it. And I'm proud to say that we're a part of that, working to fight this fraud through education and disruption. But we have to disrupt the entire scam. And I think that's a really important part of this. It's hard enough to get in front of one victim here and there, but I do think it's risen to this national security issue. And I think things like sanctions would start help bringing these governments to the table.
Yeah, definitely. And you've mentioned in the beginning, now we finished with sanctions and started from national security threat. I just had over about a month ago Ari Redrod from TRM. And that's one of the most staggering things that he said as well. That it already rises to the level of a national security threat, and maybe it should be dealt as such with respect to sanctions and other diplomatic influences that can be done by the U.S. government. But yeah, sorry, you were saying?
Yeah, I was going to say TRM Labs had a great statistic about this being, there's over 12 billion in these types of scams last year, according to TRM Labs. So it is huge. I agree with Ari. Definitely, we're at a national security issue.
Yeah, and just to give you some numbers, because I'm pulling up our dashboard right now. So from the beginning of the year, we have already surpassed $3 billion in pig butchering scams. Not only pig butchering, but let's say authorized fraud scams. And we're talking about at least 200,000 victims worldwide. So that just goes to show that these programs like Level Up, they are important, but it's too little, too late, right? Because at the end of the day, the magnitude of this phenomenon is huge. Just to give you one example from my personal experience, we're working with some of the biggest crypto exchanges, helping them to prevent fraud. And in one single case, for one single exchange, we have already prevented $315 million from the beginning of the year. And that's just, one specific example in one specific crypto exchange.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And one of the things that we see is indeed, just to, reiterate what you said, is usually when they go, their customer success teams and, their client facing teams are going to the victim and telling them, listen, we have clear evidence, and that's what we provide to them, that you are sending funds to a wallet that is affiliated to a pig butchering network. Usually what they hear from them is, no, we're fine, because usually they think that they're sending funds to their lover somewhere else, or to somebody who is in trouble, or somebody that offers them a very interesting investment scheme. So yeah, this problem is huge indeed.
Yeah, so I was at the International Association of Financial Crimes Investigators. It's IAFCI. It's a great organization. I was at their cyber fraud summit speaking a few weeks ago, and I got to listen to a presentation from AARP, and they interviewed a woman who'd been a victim of one of these fraud schemes. And one of the things she said, it was really moving to listen to her, because she was just so brave and powerful for getting up there and trying to raise awareness about this. And she said, I really wish my financial institution had been more forceful in warning me. Over 60, I've never withdrawn large sums of money before, and suddenly I was coming in taking out $300,000-$400,000 every few weeks until there was nothing left, and no one said anything to me. So she said, I wish they hadn't been so nice about it. I wish they'd called and said, this is what we think is happening.
Yeah, it's a great example, because if you look at the value chain of a pig butchering scheme, right? So you have a direct contact between the victim and the victimizer. Again, as you said, usually somebody that's been trafficked to Myanmar or somewhere to actually make this connection and so on. But that's the less relevant thing. The more interesting part is where the money starts actually moving, right? And then this, old lady is going to its bank, right, and asks it to transfer funds to Binance, for instance, right? And nobody asks questions. Nobody, it doesn't raise any eyebrows that a lady that has $60K bank account all of a sudden drains her entire bank account and sends it to Binance of all places, or not to smear Binance, just as an example, right? And then later, when it goes to Binance, nobody is going to ask again, Binance or OKX or whatever. Nobody is going to raise any questions that this lady that is a newbie essentially, and they've done the KYC. They see that it's an old lady that all of a sudden found interest in crypto. Then she decides to purchase crypto for $60K and to transfer the entire fund to one single wallet address, not to trade it, not to hodl it, but to transfer it to one single address. So I think that I totally agree with you that the financial institutions, whether these are the traditional ones, the banks, or the exchanges and the on and off ramps, they have a responsibility. My question to you after this long intro is whether you think that they should be forced to take responsibility in terms of regulation, in terms of some enforcement against them.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, you'd hope everyone would want to just proactively do this. I think it needs to be a combo of the public sector collaborating with the private sector on it. I think the financial institutions and the banks need to help the government come up with a clear framework about what is acceptable. And I do think the government needs to set up more guardrails and regulations to ensure reporting requirements, AML, KYC compliance is met.
Yeah, and nowadays, some of the frameworks that regulators are employing is basically looking at it from a customer protection perspective, right? You see places like Hong Kong, Singapore, UK primarily with the APP fraud regulation, and now the US with the CFPB issuing something similar, where they basically say do what you have to do, but at the end of the day, if one of your clients is being victimized, you will have to reimburse them with those funds. Do you think that this is a healthy approach, or is it going too far?
I think it's a good idea, but I think it might end up going too far because I think it might proactively lead to those institutions then just putting more guardrails up to just stop activity altogether because they're not going to be able to function if they have to do that endlessly. But I do think if it's a case of, gross negligence or they were warned about something and didn't follow through, then yeah, I think that there's like a middle ground that we could figure out there where they could be responsible to some extent for that.
Definitely. And before we wrap up, after seeing so many cases and seeing so many victims, and you've mentioned seeing one on stage only recently, what kind of advice do you give to the users, but also the platforms? How can we basically facilitate the kind of how can we minimize those phenomena to the minimum?
So I think just staying on top of what's going on and having that situational awareness of where most of this is coming from and paying attention to your customers and their activity and maybe doing more to reach out proactively and warn them. Like we do see that working. We do see it working when people are confronted that that's what's going on. So to continue doing that and to continue fighting for better regulation on it.
Yeah, for sure. On that note, Joanna, where can we read, follow you? Are you active on Twitter, on LinkedIn?
Yes. Check out LinkedIn. I have a profile on LinkedIn that I use pretty frequently. In terms of reading articles, I also am a member of the Financial Club. So I write articles for them, which you can find on LinkedIn. And I'm also the regional ambassador to the Mid-Atlantic for the Association for Women in Cryptocurrency. So we host events pretty much every other month. Sometimes it's around a conference where you can meet us for a breakfast or a coffee or a happy hour after an event. And it's really a great opportunity to network, whether you're just graduating college and looking to get into this space in some capacity, or you're already an executive and you're just looking for some more networking opportunities. The Association for Women in Cryptocurrency is great for all of that.
Perfect. And I'll make sure to add your LinkedIn to the show notes so people can follow you. and you can have some new connections. Maybe something interesting will come out of it. Joanna, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Very interesting to hear about all your vast experience and all the interesting stories, especially with respect to the Silk Road. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael.
Web3 Watchdogs is sponsored by Seizures, your one-stop shop for Web3 security and threat mitigation. Seizures harnesses the power of AI to eliminate hacks, scams, fraud, and compliance challenges in real time, and even before they happen. For more information, visit Seizures.ai. That's CYVERS.ai.